Hey everybody, this episode of the podcast is being sponsored by my friends over at Real Mushrooms, my friend Jeff Chilton and his son Sky. I interviewed Jeff on one of the earlier episodes of this podcast. Really happy that they're sponsoring this podcast. They sell medicinal mushrooms, things like reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. I think more and more people are becoming familiar with the truly amazing benefits of medicinal mushrooms on our physical, our mental, even our spiritual well-being. They're an amazing company. They're one of the few, if any, companies that's not only 100% organic, but 100% mushrooms, and that's really rare. A lot of companies have fillers or additives, or also important, it's not the mycelium that's grown on grain and mixed together, it's the actual mushroom, and that's a really rare thing. It's a really pure product. It's the only product, the medicinal mushroom product that I take. Super happy with them, super happy that they're sponsoring this podcast. If you'd like more information about them, you can check out their website at realmushrooms.com/universe to also receive 25% off of your first order. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Michael Amster. Michael is a medical doctor, and he recently co-published a book, or co-authored a book, entitled The Power of Awe. It's a really interesting book. It's really kind of blending the spirituality and the science behind literally the power of awe, how this, I guess we could say, emotional state or experience of awe really plays such a profound part or such a profound aspect in people's lives, and how it can be so healing physiologically, but also mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. It's a really interesting book. He also helped to develop a very simple technique, which is really based on mindfulness, that helps people to get in touch with, to appreciate, to, as he says, microdose this idea of awe. I think he's doing really interesting work. I found it very fascinating. We spoke a bit about this in my recent interview with my friend and colleague Brian James, about how a lot of this work is focusing on this more Western psychological model, this plant medicine work of healing, and specifically about childhood trauma, which is a super vital and integral part of this work. But that's a part of this plant work as a whole. And I think one of the things we touched on, which I think is fundamental to this work, is this cathartic experience. And these cathartic experiences, which really, at their essence, induce a space of awe. And in that space of awe, things become so much more relative, and we get out of ourselves so much into this expansiveness, into this vastness, into this stillness, this presence, this deep space of what emerges as something of gratitude, of being very grateful and very humbled by these experiences, and that's truly, truly healing on so many levels. So I think that someone's doing research on this is really beautiful. So it was a very fascinating conversation. Pleasure to have him on. Just a guy who's walked many paths, weaving different spiritual traditions, a medical doctor, which is super interesting, and also now a researcher in this idea of awe. So really fascinating conversation, and I trust you all will get a lot out of this. In terms of my own work, when this is released, we may actually already be in Dieta in Portugal. I'm not sure exactly when this will be released, but if it is released before then, we do still, at the time of me speaking now, we do still have a few spots left open for that. And after that, we'll be in Ireland in July 1st, and we also still have a few spaces open for that. So if you're interested in working with me, with my colleague Marav Artsy, experiencing the awe-inducing effects of plant medicine, that's a beautiful opportunity. And as always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a beautiful option. It's a website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers also give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&A. I really like the idea of websites like that because they're built off this idea of reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining something from this podcast, that's a beautiful way to give back. If you're not able to do that, as always, helping with the algorithms really helps. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. So I think that's it for the intro, and without further ado, here is my conversation with Michael.
Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Thank you again. I mean, it's always a little funny, these starts, because we were chatting a little before. But again, welcome on the podcast. It's really nice to have you. I think it was a publicist of the book you recently wrote that reached out to me, and it was quite a while ago. So I apologize that we couldn't have you on sooner. But in the end, I think timing works out perfectly. I was mentioning a little to you, a big part of this podcast kind of started and revolved around my work of working with plant medicines. And it was interesting because I had a conversation with a good friend and a colleague of mine the other day about how kind of the emphasis of a lot of this work of spirituality, but certainly around plants and plant medicine and just medicine in general. You were also mentioning the co-author of your book, who's a psychologist. There's been a lot of talk, and I think in good ways, about how this work can be so beneficial for things like trauma and working on the mind and people's past experiences. But we were kind of talking about how there can also be an overemphasis on that, and that one of the things that I think is maybe forgotten about when speaking about these kind of sacred practices, or really any kind of spiritual practice in its essence, is this idea of awe. And when someone really has this kind of cathartic experience of awe, or a moment of feeling connected, or feeling in touch or presence of God or the universe or creator, or just the expansiveness of things, that's such a healing process. And it almost pales the other things in comparison, because everything is seen in a more, I think, relative sense, and that those experiences are often extremely transformative. And so I thought it was just so fascinating that you wrote a book, because I think at first read, it's kind of strange, like, can there be science behind awe? Because it seems like such an ephemeral, hard to kind of reduce or even to put into words, that this experience, which is, I think, really fundamental at the human experience. So I thought you were just a fascinating person to have on to speak about that, because I think at the basis of not only the work that I do, but spirituality in general, that's really a fundamental aspect that so many of these spiritual paths are trying to actually point towards or allude towards, is to getting in touch of this sense of awe, which is, and I don't know, maybe we can talk more about this. I don't know if that's a solely human characteristic of being able to experience awe. If I'm trying to think if I would think that other animals could experience that. I don't know, but certainly it's something that I think is very special, that we as humans can experience. So maybe to start off, some people have maybe read your book. I would imagine a lot of people haven't, and this is always a big question. But just to say a little about yourself, about who you are, maybe a bit of your background, and what in life kind of led you down this road to eventually write a book on the power of awe.
First of all, I wanted to thank you, Jason, for the opportunity to be here, and for reaching out. I'm just really thrilled to get to spend this time with you, and this conversation, I think, is going to be quite awe-inspiring. So thank you. And it's just great to meet your community of listeners as well. So my name is Michael Amster. I'm a medical doctor, and my journey into eventually becoming an expert in awe, I would say, started in my childhood. I was a child that was really always fascinated and loved connecting to nature, and felt that was really my my spiritual temple, I guess you could say, in many ways. And I also suffered from anxiety as a kid. And as I went through my education, I wanted to be a doctor since I was a little kid, actually, as early as I could remember, probably when I was 3 years old, I wanted to be a medical doctor. I loved playing doctor as a kid. And as I went along in my education and the stakes got higher with taking exams, I started to experience more and more test taking anxiety. And when I was taking the MCAT, which is the test to get into medical school, I had a full blown panic attack where my nervous system was like literally hijacked. I couldn't think. My heart was racing. I was sweating. I thought I was going to die. I like ran out of the test room in tears, just really quite. I was hijacked by my sympathetic nervous system. And I was at a crossroads where I either needed to get on pharmaceuticals to manage my anxiety or find some other way to work with my anxious mind. A friend recommended doing a meditation retreat, and that just completely transformed my life. I did a 10-day Vipassana retreat, which I think for some people, it's sort of their gateway experience of going on a meditation retreat like that. And I finally experienced a peace that I'd never had before in my life. It was not easy. It was a really hard experience, actually, to sit there for 10 days and to sort of see what my mind went through. But ultimately, I came out of it with a lot of inner peace and clarity and a calmness that I'd never had experienced. And so that took me down a road of studying mindfulness, particularly Buddhism, and other areas of Eastern practices like yoga. And I've studied Qigong and different embodied mindfulness practices. Eventually, I got trained as a mindfulness teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which is a Theravada-based center in California. I've led a Sangha for a number of years, which I really love doing. I don't lead it anymore, but it was an interfaith Sangha. So it was really quite a beautiful thing to bring in not just Buddhism philosophy, but Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and really to sort of build these bridges and connections and see how all these brilliant spiritual practices have so much in common with each other. I am a pain management specialist, and so I lead mindfulness pain groups as part of what I do professionally. I've had thousands of patients go through these 8-week pain, I call it Pain Management Essentials program, but really it's using mindfulness as sort of a base foundation of that program. And I'm going to close my screen here, sorry. Then about 6 years ago, I connected with a colleague, mentor, friend of mine, Jake Eagle, who is actually the co-author of my book. He's brilliant. I just love Jake's work. He has a website about living consciously, and he's an author of other books. And we had a conversation about how we've noticed our patients really struggling with having a regular daily mindfulness practice, that people will get inspired, they'll try it, and then they don't have the time or the concentration, or they actually find sitting for 10 minutes to be painful, or it brings up a lot of emotional trauma or pain. And we started exploring this idea of microdosing mindfulness. That's initially what we called our work, was microdosing mindfulness. And we're coming up with these really brief mindfulness meditation experiences to give people a taste of what the Buddha calls like kind of that sense of nirvana, that sense of deep inner peace, of connection, of quiet, of calm, of pure presence. And from that, I flew out to Hawaii, where Jake lives, and we set out to spend a week together to come up with sort of this ideal practice that can really take people to that state in a matter of 15 to 30 seconds. And Hawaii, for those of you that have been there or know about it, it's really an extraordinarily beautiful place with incredible ocean and the sky and the fauna and the flora. Everything about it is just mind-blowingly beautiful. It's just filled with extraordinary awe. Well, it was actually in this very ordinary moment of making pancakes one morning for Jake and his wife Hannah, where I had this like really profound moment of awe, simply watching these pancakes go from the batter, liquid batter, into a solid, fluffy creation. And I had made pancakes probably 1,000 times before that in my life. But for most people, when we make pancakes, we're multitasking. We like pour the batter and then we're running off and we're making sausage or we're putting our kids' lunch together. Or we're making coffee. We're like, we don't sit there and just witness this experience of a pancake, um, maturing into this incredible creation. And I had this like really orgasmic, literally, like my whole body was in chilled and I started crying. I was like just so overtaken with this emotion of watching this pancake create itself. And that's when we came up with this awe method, which is this simple practice of helping people begin to experience very powerful moments of awe in the ordinary. We're not the first ones to study awe. Awe has been studied now for about 20 years. One of our co-researchers, Dacher Keltner, who's the founder of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, is really the granddaddy of awe research. He started the field and was really curious about it back in 2003 with his first paper that he wrote. And so there's been a whole now generation of researchers studying the emotion of awe. First, really from a psychological perspective, a sociological perspective. And now with me as a physician, I'm really the first medical doctor to study awe. We're now doing clinical research and applying what we call this awe method to teach people a very simple practice of experiencing awe in the ordinary. And that's what's really unique about our work, is that the researchers were previously studying just extraordinary awe. They were putting people in immersive experiences, virtual reality, or having them go out and to have pretty awesome nature experiences to elicit awe. But for us, it's really about finding awe in the everyday and tuning our eyes, our ears, our senses to finding that extraordinary in the ordinary.
So yeah, there's a lot there to dig into. It's interesting because I've lived a long time in South America, and in English, it's rare that I hear people say that they were born a sensitive person. And yet in Spanish, often when you're describing like a healer, a curandero, or someone who is kind of drawn to more of these healing practices, they in Spanish they often use the word like what would be translated as sensitive. They describe them as sensitive people, and it means that like their senses are maybe more opened, more heightened, that they're more in tune. They have a way of maybe experiencing things. Interestingly, the kind of upside is you're more sensitive, like you have a heightened sense of sensitivity. The downside of that, and I think that's a lot of kind of the balance of what any of these arts or practices are doing, is that I think people are much more prone to things like anxiety or maybe not feeling at home in their body, or not feeling as grounded, actually being more connected in a lot of like these indigenous practices is being more kind of in the realm of spirit. They're not so of this earth. In our Western societies, we tend to take that as being something quite negative. But it's interesting because your anxiety also, I would imagine, kind of led you on this spiritual path, which I think is a really common archetype. Is that something you've seen as you've begun to do this work, that often these things that we may view as a negativity, like anxiety, can actually be a catalyst to kind of move people in a direction of actually seeking the thing that may somehow bring them into a more maybe holistic or balanced state with that?
Yeah, I definitely have had that feedback from many people that have read my book or that have attended the group programs that I teach. People will say, "Well, I've always been someone who's found the beauty and really looked at things and been struck by the simplicity of like the workings of the universe." And I've never been able to put a word on it. But now that you wrote about this and you explain this in your book, I feel like I understand myself better. So definitely I'm seeing that, and I hear that. There's actually, in terms of research tools, and people can search for this online, it's the dispositional personality awe scale. You can probably Google it, and you can do a questionnaire, and it sort of gives a rating about your own natural propensity of experiencing moments of awe in your life. And so I didn't know about the scale before studying this, but I probably would have scored, pretty high. And what we've seen in our research, which is really neat, is that we'll take a group of people, let's say 300 primary care patients that are completely unfamiliar with this work, and then we'll teach them this very simple practice in a 21-day program to start to bring awe in their everyday life. And within 21 days, they're building a muscle of awe, and they'll see a very marked change in their scores. So you can learn this, and instead of it just being a temporary state, it becomes a trait of who you are as a person. It literally is changing your wiring in your brain. So you begin to live life and seeing things from a place of wonder and amazement. And sociologically and psychologically, there's just so many benefits. Awe is what is called a pro-social emotion, which means within it there are all these other positive emotions. So based on the research, we know that, for example, awe makes us more generous. It makes us more empathetic. It makes us more kind. It improves relationships. It more than ever, we need this right now with political extremisms on both sides, but it helps us be open to seeing other people's points of view and be more tolerant. And then from my research, what we've done is that we know that awe lowers depression, anxiety, lowers chronic pain, decreases experiences of loneliness, and improves stress management and burnout. So there's just a whole, this is a really big topic of how powerful this is as an emotion. And I hope later we can even talk a little about the science of how awe works and what's actually happening in the physiology of our bodies and our brains, and why it is truly probably one of the most powerful of all positive emotions. And I appreciate you talking about that at the beginning of the podcast, because you touched on, human evolution and how part of the reason why we maybe have survived as a species is because we have the ability to experience awe. And I think, I have an incredible Australian Shepherd, and I believe my dog experiences moments of awe. The way sometimes she just sits out there and she just sort of looks out at the world and just seems to be taking it in with so much presence and joy. I think she's experiencing moments of awe. So I think as mammals, it's probably different levels and degrees, but I think it's definitely part of our way our brains are wired to work.
You spoke about this idea of mindfulness, and I think that's a practice that probably a lot of people are familiar with. Some have maybe practiced it, some haven't. What was it in mindfulness that you found to be really beneficial to yourself? And you mentioned a lot of different practices. You had done yoga, tai chi, qigong. What about mindfulness specifically did you find that really resonated with you, that also made you kind of try and almost like alchemize it down to something really pure to try and spread that message?
Hmm. It's a great question. I think as someone that's familiar with having a really active monkey mind, um, experiencing the mind not racing and slowing down for me is probably the biggest impact. Um, and just being really more present with experiences of the senses and of aliveness in my breath. So I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing. Another aspect I really love and appreciate about mindfulness, and this might be an aspect that your students experience when they're on their retreats, is sort of the sense of being removed from myself and being an observer of sort of the observed experience, um, that is really powerful, to sort of be almost one step removed from um, myself, and to sort of see the vastness in the bigger picture of things. And that's actually one aspect of awe, which is the sort of sense of perceived vastness, experiencing vastness of something bigger than the self.
And what was that like? That's quite a unique experience of I think you said like leading sanghas, but also this kind of interfaith dimension of it, of bringing different faiths together. Is I mean, it's interesting because you even mentioned this idea of like political divisiveness of our time, and I think that's very true, and not just in the U.S., but you see it all over the world, and I think so much of that really comes. I mean, I would guess on a very fundamental level from this kind of egoic place of very much identifying of me or mine, like my identity, my belief, my team, and anything that goes along or goes outside of that, we resist. And I mean, it's a very old practice. It's nothing new. Um, what was that like for you of kind of being in an atmosphere where there were all of these different people coming together? I mean, that's quite rare where you're bringing together Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, in an environment. Was there something that kind of you found threaded all of those different people or practices together, something that they were all kind of searching for, they found in that Sangha?
Well, the Sangha actually started when as part of my sort of, I guess, thesis or project of becoming a teacher was I was really curious, being raised Jewish and feeling, very connected to that religion. I was curious, like also with my interest and passion in Buddhism, where the commonalities were. And so I taught this course called Stepping into Freedom. And it was around the themes of Passover, which is like the story of the slaves being freed from Egypt, which is celebrated at the time around Easter in the springtime. And I was just like kind of blown away with the commonalities within the themes of that holiday and sort of deeper Jewish spiritual teachings, and then within Buddhism. And then the class was extremely well attended. And I taught this at the synagogue, and then the rabbi asked me to continue, and the students asked me to continue leading a regular meditation group. And so that turned into a Sangha. And then from that, it grew into really just being an interfaith Sangha. So it was sort of open to everybody. And the way basically I was sort of running the group was I was really curious to see the commonalities, sort of the threads. That's really what the whole focus was. So ideas of like, certain like Jewish holidays, like maybe of like the Jewish New Year or this holiday of Sukkot, and which is about like living in a temporary shelter after the beginning of the new year. And so that's like the whole theme of impermanence and letting go of identification and holding on to things that are permanent, and a sort of sense of like our identity, our egoic selves being permeable and ever changing. So it was just really beautiful to see like all these commonalities, and then having the members that were Muslim or Christian or Catholic, and like them throwing in their perspectives and really open it up for like letting the Dharma flow just fluidly from all these different spiritual directions, and then just seeing all the commonalities. Because in my understanding of like studying, Buddhism, is that along the Silk Road, these traditions like just freely traveled. Like for example, the iconography that we have today of the Buddha, early Buddhists didn't have like Buddha statues of a Buddha sitting. This happened when Buddhism traveled all the way to Greece, into the far, like Western, into Europe. And then it sort of traveled back because the Greeks had statues and they had of their gods. And so the first 500 years of Buddhism, it was like the wheel of the Dharma. That was like, there was no Buddha iconography. And so there's a ton of cross-pollination within all of our spiritual traditions that I guess in many ways it's sort of been forgotten. I mean, there are people that are really attuned with that now, but um, I mean, it's so healing, like to think about like the. I mean, I think it's really awe-inspiring actually if you think about the connections of all of sort of the spiritual traditions, because humans, even though we were on different parts of the planet, we were all sort of evolving and waking up, independent of like communicating with each other. There was like spiritual evolution happening in India and spiritual evolution happening in Africa and in Europe and in the Middle East, or like all over the planet in indigenous cultures in South America. We're all sort of like having these like deep awakenings up, um, independent of knowing that each other even existed on the planet. But it just all was happening at the same time with our human evolution. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think that's probably what draws a lot of people like ourselves to this path is that search for truth. I lived in New York City for a long time, and I used to volunteer at a yoga center. It's kind of before yoga got very popular. It was this kind of old school yoga where you sat most of the class and you did a couple gentle stretches. But I always remember there was the guy who founded it. I think his name was Satchidananda, and as you went through the main door, this was in the West Village. There was a quote of him, and he said, "Paths are many, truth is one," and that even from a young age, that always really stuck to me. That you know, I also practice martial arts, and I think it's kind of a similar thing. It's like we all have two fists, two arms, two legs, one head. Like there's only so many ways the human body can move, and so you have a lot of different names of different practices, and yet at their essence, they're all trying to get to the same thing. Um, One of the interesting things I think also, which is quite interesting, because in the West, I find kind of archetypally, but because you're a medical doctor, and also one of the interesting things I find is often the field of medicine and spirituality are very disconnected. And yet traditionally that wasn't the case. I mean, if you look back at the Greek civilization or even prior the Egyptian civilization, I mean, usually those fields were actually intricately interwoven. To practice medicine was also to have some connection to spirit as well. Even you're mentioning your friend who's a psychologist. I mean, that word psyche, it actually means soul. It's not the mind as it's often translated. And even like in South America, where I've spent a lot of time recently, like that the shaman or the healer was also a medical doctor by today's standards. I mean, he was someone who not only healed the physical body, but he healed things that couldn't be seen. He worked on the mind, on the emotions, but also this idea of soul. What was it about being a medical doctor that called to you, and do you see any kind of correlation between that path that's also maybe drawn you to the spiritual?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I've always been interested in more holistic medicine, and before going to medical school, studied traditional Chinese medicine, and as I've shared, studied Qigong in China, and um, been interested actually in studying Native American medicine or medicine from South America, and I've had opportunities to study with curanderos. So I it's been really an honor to sort of straddle those worlds of being a physician. I do some surgery, and I find that a very sacred act of being able to, um, you know, do that type of healing work involving scalpels and sewing up people, and then actually implant these little microcomputers in the spinal cord and to help people with pain. Um, yeah, it's really been just an honor in this sort of journey of being a healer. And um, I'm always reminded that I'm still a student. I'm practicing medicine. It's a practice. I'm not the master of medicine. So yeah, I just continue this journey of seeing the integration. And uh, I do wish that the training that physicians have brought more spirituality and understanding the psyche into their training. When I was in med school at UC Irvine, I led the integrative medicine student group, and we had a nice meditation group for med students, and that was a really valuable part of my education there. But the system definitely needs to continue providing more openness and more integration in an ideal world. So, and I think it's changing. It's changed a lot, and I see that more and more with students and young students today that I get to mentor and work with. They're very clear on their path.
Do you have a sense of maybe where, again, like speaking of these things in general terms can be difficult, but for lack of better words, something like Western medicine. I mean, like I was saying, in ancient Greece, I mean, a doctor had to be versed in the stars and in all sciences and in philosophy and it was a true kind of liberal arts education in that sense. Again, even that idea of psyche, of having something to do with the soul. But usually in a lot of Western medicine, I mean, it's become so specialized in one way, in an amazing aspect. I mean, the things that Western medicine can do is truly amazing. Like you said, I mean, to implant a microchip in someone's spine. I mean, first to open their body, to be able to have an understanding of the body, to implant that can have, I would imagine, some connection to neural pathways or nerves or something that's, kind of switching it on or off, these different receptors. At the same time, usually in Western medicine, if you were to talk about something like spirituality, that it's not really in the vernacular of that system. And yet at the same time, I think most medical doctors would very much say that something like faith has a part in medicine. I mean, if someone believes in their doctor or the medicine that they're taking, that they believe they're going to get better, there must be a higher rate of healing than someone who's just completely skeptical. And that also kind of seems a bit at odds with the Western model, because it is very kind of, if you do this, then this happens. And if you don't, then this happens. Do you have some sense where maybe that more kind of holistic way of even doing something like having a sangha, and again, this is probably quite personal, but it even seems like there's certain limits that a medical doctor would have to what you can recommend, because like obviously the doctor is held responsible. So like, are you able to offer something like, hey, like maybe this sangha would be really good for you, or maybe having some spiritual practice, maybe doing something like qigong could be really beneficial for you. Do you see that as like maybe kind of where that split came from? And also it's something I see. I think these integrative practices are becoming more accepted. Do you see something in the kind of medical model that's also beginning to maybe go down that route of bringing in different modalities that may not be specifically in kind of a more allopathic field?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I just want to just briefly touch on this idea of specialization. And I've heard one of your podcasts. I think you told a story about you broke your nose in New York, and you had to like wait. You went from like sort of nurse to doctor to nurse to doctor, and then eventually it was like, oh, well, you have to come back on Monday to see the ENT who's going to set your nose. And you're like, well, my grandfather was an osteopath, and I would just walk in and in the old days, and he would set it in 2 minutes and it'd be over with. So, yeah, there's a certain, we've lost something around, I think, the art of medicine by super specialization. But I also understand like why people are drawn to that. And I'll just share briefly my own personal story is that I always wanted to be a small town family doctor. That's sort of what my vision was. And I did two residency type training programs. I first did family medicine, but I actually realized very quickly when I got into the program that it wasn't the right fit for me, and that I actually wanted to be a specialist. And for me, it was I actually found the the breadth of being a primary care provider to be really daunting and quite honestly anxiety provoking, that I would just never know enough, and I'd be worried about maybe harming someone because I didn't have that enough of a so much knowledge base. And what I love about being a specialist is I do have a silo of knowledge and expertise. And I'd say that I bring my family doctor hat in terms of how I see the whole patient into being a specialist, of being a pain management specialist. So I'm really grateful I have the breadth knowledge, but then I get to be, in terms of what I do day to day, be more specialized. And so I think for a lot of people, that is their gift, maybe, to be a specialist, to be really good at some one thing and be just the leading expert. And I really like being an expert in something. It makes me feel really good in terms of my own, I guess, spiritual evolution, to feel like I have a knowledge base that I'm really an expert at. Just like you're an expert in tobacco and the plant medicine that you do. So that's that topic. But then in terms of, recommendations and what I feel like able to do as a physician. So I lead these 8-week long sort of deep dives into like living with chronic pain. And basically I'm creating a Sangha. So I'm in the middle of a group right now. We're in week 5 of an 8-week program. And I co-teach this with an acupuncture team. So the patients come in the morning. They do community acupuncture, which is sort of where everyone sort of sits in like these zero gravity chairs, and they all get acupuncture in the same space together. And then the needles are taken out. I come in, I lead Qigong to get them back into their bodies. And then I lead like an hour-long didactic and share about different ways of helping people manage their pain. Part of it is the Ah method, the Ah practice, and different mindfulness techniques. But what I'm really helping people do is, one, they're connecting with community. And I mean, I think this is like so important. And I know you lead these dietas, these like really intense retreats. And I know, having been a retreat leader myself, I lead retreats with my wife down in Mexico, these Power of Awe retreats, that such a big part of what happens in the healing space is the community, the connection, the sharing of the commonality, and the shared humanness of people doing that work together is just so powerful. So I've never really felt any limit about what I can recommend to a patient. I'm not worried about the medical board coming after me to say, well, I think you'd really benefit from attending a meditation group or being part of a Sangha, or maybe you should consider doing plant medicine or ketamine, or, fortunately, I think everything is opening more and more. We're seeing that. I mean, yeah, there's been periods of times where doctors have sort of been, that are on the fringes, are sort of gone after by the medical board, like particularly now, I guess, around vaccine issues is sort of a big one for a lot of people. But independent of that, I think there's a lot of opening and seeing that healing happens not just on the physical body with taking a drug, but I completely agree with you that the belief is so important of the patient, and what we call the placebo effect is so much of what's happening in the room with the patient. The doctor-patient relationship, the patient buying into their treatment, the patient's like addressing their bigger health picture, like their diet, their sleep, their stress management. Are they doing meaningful work in the world? Their relationships. So it's like the whole big picture. So hopefully people's physicians are taken into account. Of course, it's near impossible to do that in a 20-minute visit with what insurance wants to pay for. But there's I think we're actually at a big crossroads, actually, with where medicine is going. I hope that with actually the aid of AI, that physicians are going to be able to spend more time talking to patients and really connecting with the patients, and the computer systems can really do a better job at analyzing laboratory data and knowing like people's genetics and like sort of the big picture of all this sort of data, and then being able to make the decisions that are going to be best um, based on data science of like, well, if someone has hypertension, well, what drug might be the best one for that, or what lifestyle change might be the best one based upon all the data, that humans just really can't like hold all that information and make the best choices for people. That's my thought on that.
Yeah, that's an
how,
amazing explanation.
how about what do you think about the future of medicine or where things are going?
I don't know. I think the AI topic is something really fascinating. That kind of computational power. I would imagine there's a lot of potentiality, possibility. At the same time, I think so many of these things, there's a balance to it, and I think one of the reasons we see a lot of rates of I think real increases in anxiety, depression, just maybe sense of overall not non-well-being or even chronic ailments is also because as a whole organism, like we can only be in dysbiosis for so long before disease arises. And and I think that's where maybe you're also alluding to a lot of modern medicine is maybe at a crossroads, because I think at a certain point, we also have to come back to very fundamental things like, is our water clean? Is our food clean? What are our relationships like? What is our connection to nature? What is our stress capability? What is our attention capability? And I think those things are getting pushed to kind of more and more extremes. And I was listening to another podcast you did, and you said something really beautiful. I think it was about your daughter who chose to get off social media. And I think that's kind of an example of one of these counterbalances of people making choices of maybe going down a certain road and seeing that ultimately this may not be the best thing. And it doesn't mean that we need to get off it completely, but that may be the case in order to kind of bring ourselves into more of a symbiosis, into more of a balance, a state of harmony. And so yeah, I think in a way with all of these advances of medicine, there's also a returning to very fundamental aspects of what does it mean to be a human being. And I think one of the things you mentioned is extremely important, which is that idea of community. And I think that's something that so many people are expressing now, is they feel very disconnected. People live in cities and in isolated apartments, and they don't have family, or they're not surrounded by family. They don't have children, or they don't have a partner. And the more, even with this increase of technology, even what we're doing now, being on this computer, which is this amazing, opportunity that we have, at a certain point, we also need like real connection. And, we can only go so far in one direction before I think we have to course correct. And I would imagine that's a lot of what's happening right now,
Yeah,
which
I
I
would
think is
agree.
also why some of these things like plant medicine are re-emerging. I mean, these are very old practices. They're not, it's often spoken of like the psychedelic renaissance, but it's maybe a renaissance for some people. But these are very, very ancient practices that were really seen as fundamental parts of what it meant to be a human being. I mean, even like in the Buddhist kind of sense, I find it very fascinating, because I think often people, much like we were saying with this political divisiveness, there's this sense of ego that like my suffering is so great, or the suffering that we're experiencing as society today has never been seen before. And yet the Buddha was teaching about these things 2000, 2500 years ago, and he was pointing towards fundamental truths. And even in some of these traditions I've studied in the Amazon, I mean, they speak that about this idea that eons ago humans were suffering. I mean, eons ago. I mean, that's a whole different even cosmovision. And even today, like from a lot of my work, my research, my intuition, I think humanity is much older than we think it is. And even, I don't know if you saw, but in the last few days, it came out that they some crazy new technology, kind of like LiDAR, but even more advanced, and they were scanning under the Great Pyramid, and they found something like 8 columns that go below the Great Pyramid that have these spiral forms to them, and they go something like 645 meters below the Great Pyramids. And then those open up to these like cylindrical structures that go 2 kilometers below the Great Pyramids. I mean, this is like crazy. And as according to our theories, that the pyramids were built with like stone tools and copper chisels. And but kind of my point of that is, like, even in some of these Amazonian traditions, they speak that eons ago humans were alive, and even then they were still suffering because they were still humans, and that essentially a lot of these sacred plants, these sacraments, which is so fundamental. You were talking about this idea of like the bridging of all of these different religions, and whether you look at the Veda religion, where they're speaking about Soma, or the Zoroastrian religion, where Zoroaster, their prophet, took Hauma, and in Farsi you don't pronounce the S, you pronounce it like an H, so Soma would be Hauma. And there was this sacrament, this religious sacrament, much like I think in the Catholic Church they still speak about ingesting a sacrament that puts you in touch with the Christ consciousness. But these sacraments were fundamental parts of spirituality, which at its essence is also what it means to be a human being. And but kind of going back to this idea of in the Amazon, this idea that eons ago humans were suffering, and they have this kind of story that, very interestingly, and this may be going kind of down a tangent, but they said that these higher kind of beings, these star beings, interestingly from the star system Sirius, which is interesting because all over the world you have this very common archetype of a very particular star, where these kind of higher beings, they said, transcended the 12 dimensions of time and space on this primordial anaconda canoe. And on this canoe, they brought with them all of these different plants, which were like these keys that helped to unlock the essence of what it means to be a human. But they said essentially that the reason humans were suffering is because we've forgotten who we are and where we come from. And that essentially all of our suffering, all of our pain, all of our longing, our sadness ultimately stems from that. And I think that's also a very universal religious concept, which is this idea of separation, that we fell from grace, we fell from wholeness into the duality, into the split, into the separation, and that's kind of the fundamental root of our suffering. So kind of, I guess, a long answer to your question, but I think a lot of where we're moving is kind of also coming back to remembering or re-understanding these fundamental aspects of what it means to be a human.
Yeah, the word in Pali, the language of the Buddha, sati, which is the mindfulness word, it means to remember, to like come back to. So I just love all the commonalities and similarities.
Yeah.
It's like we practice the mindfulness to come back to the present moment, to remember we are alive, that we are connected to this vastness of all life, that we're not each other's enemies, like these false stories and narratives that we are brainwashed into believing that we're separate, but that we're all connected, this sort of non-dual truth. So yeah, I'm a big believer in us doing this work we got to do to like get back to remembering and reconnecting ourselves, as to why we're truly here. And I think awe, coming back to the awe, is it's one of those doorways to do that, because when we practice these moments of awe, one is it brings us, it's a present moment emotion. It brings us into the present moment fully. Two is that it connects to something greater than the small egoic self. It makes us feel like we're part of something much greater than what we identify ourselves with, like whether we call it God or consciousness or spirit, the totality of the universe. I mean, you see this with the work you do, that when people have these moments of these profound moments of awe, their sense of isolation and small self sort of melt away, and then they feel connected to the greaterness and the vastness, and deep healing happens when we feel that. our nervous systems can relax, our guarding can drop down. Um, in terms of health, I see it all the time with my patients and that are living with chronic pain and chronic inflammation. So much of what we're dealing with in medicine, most diseases are caused by chronic inflammation in the body. Depression is believed to be a chronic inflammatory state in the brain. Like diabetes is chronic inflammation, heart disease is chronic inflammation. Cancers are related to chronic inflammatory conditions as well. And we know from the science that this practice actually lowers inflammation in the body. Like this simple practice does that. Like, wow. And we talk about this in our book about we do have an investigation around like what's going on in health and in medicine and how powerful this simple practice can be. Like, we haven't really talked about my research, but we just briefly, I'll just share that we studied in 300 primary care patients, about 150 doctors and nurses at the height of the pandemic when people were super stressed out. And teaching this very simple technique in 21 days, we saw a 36% reduction in depression, 20-something percent, about 25% reduction in anxiety, lowered chronic pain, improvements of people managing stress and lowered burnout. And really cool was like the sense of connection. Like people were sheltering in place, they were at home, they were doing this program through Zoom, this study, and yet they felt connected because awe is this really powerful emotion that brings us out of the small self and into feeling like we're greater than what we believe we are. So I think this is just, I'm very excited and, really passionate about the work I'm doing in this area. And, people don't have maybe the time or the money to go away on long retreats. I love long retreats. I've been on many of them, and there's something so sacred and special about going away, and the whole ritual of being on a retreat and the community that's built there. But this practice is a practice that's sustainable, that we can do every day, when we're off the mat, we're off the cushion, we're not on retreat, and it keeps us remembering that sati of why we are here, why we are precious, why we are human.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think before we started recording, I was telling you a bit about. I had a conversation recently with a friend and colleague of mine. His name is Brian James, and he wrote a book called Traumadelic, and kind of about this idea about how a lot of these sacred plants or sacraments are moving more into a more kind of Western-based, psychological-based modality of very much like a one-on-one relationship, of kind of talk therapy, and also having amazing results. I mean, I think there was a Johns Hopkins study a number of years ago where they worked with psilocybin with people who were chronically ill or basically, I think, very close to dying. And a large majority of them described that experience very much through this lens of awe, that it was one of the most, or one of the top three most profound experiences of their lives. And they all kind of relayed a sense of more peace, less anxiety, less fear around death, more of an acceptance, a closer relationship to their loved ones. That's an amazing result. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of benefit in that. What kind of the premise of his book was that is that there's also kind of a downside of, as you said, when we also begin to forget the broader context of these sacraments, the things like a sense of community, like you said, going through a ritualistic event with fellow people, that the connection that arises, that the compassion, the empathy of also seeing that, like, I'm not alone in this. There's other people who are also human beings. They also have their own problems, their own struggles, and everyone's kind of going through this together. But also very much, I think what we were really pointing to was that one of the fundamental aspects of these plants, which is even beyond trauma, is this sense of producing an experience that puts us in a state of awe. For a long time, I worked at a very large plant medicine center in the Peruvian Amazon, and there was a few things that I always saw in people where I really knew that they had really connected to the medicine, and they had really healed something very deep, and that was a sense of gratitude, a sense of humility, and a sense of awe. I mean, those three things, when I saw those in someone, like something very profound had shifted. And I think, as you said, that sense of awe, that sense of getting out of ourselves, out of our story, out of our all of these things that we attach to my traumas, my stories, my pains, all of those things can be worked on. But when there was this this sensation of expansiveness, of awe, of coming into contact with something that's far greater than ourselves, whether it's the universe or God or our creator, obviously that's going to depend on each person and their worldview, but it put everything into perspective, and it opened them to a new possibility. And even I think a lot of the science around this work is this idea of neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, literally being open to new ways of being, not being stuck in the past. So yeah, that's why I was saying I think that this idea of what you're speaking about is also so fundamental, not only to my work, but I think to spiritual practices as a whole. What was it? I mean, because I'd love to get into the science maybe after, but maybe just before that, like what was it about you particularly that allowed you to understand that this idea of awe was so profound, and there was a key there that needed to be maybe studied or looked at in a way that you didn't potentially see was so much in people's consciousness.
Well, um, as I shared earlier, just sort of being a sensitive kid, and I can remember my parents sending me away to sleepaway camp. And I think for a lot of kids, like the highlight maybe is like being in the bunk and connecting with other kids or playing the sports. And for me, um, it was like these memories of like seeing the beauty of the nature and the light filtering through the trees. Or they had a guest teacher that did like a progressive visualization of connecting time into like your inner guide inside and laying us out in the forest and doing that. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. So um yeah, just I mean, it's just been part of that journey that I just feel grateful that I got to experience. And I can now see that the anxiety and the sort of these hard times really brought me to where I am today of ultimately becoming a researcher and an expert in the emotion of awe. Um, One of the things that you touched on, I just wanted to share because it sort of ties into how to define awe, because I think sometimes people, they're like, well, what is awe? Like, I kind of know, like, I've been to the edge of the Grand Canyon and I had that moment, but like, what's really going on in me? And like, what's that experience that I'm having right now? So, um, just briefly defining it, I think it's kind of important. If I could touch on that for a second. In our book, we say awe is an emotional experience in which we sense being in the presence of something that transcends our normal perception of the world. Um, Scientifically speaking, in terms of how the scientists make awe unique as a scientific emotion, one is this idea of perceptual vastness. So the sense of connecting to something greater than the small self. Um, it's not necessarily physical vastness outside. Like it's great to be at the edge of the Grand Canyon and experience that incredible view, but really it's about the internal vastness that we become feeling quite vast. And then you touched on the second part of the definition in what you were just sharing around these spiritual experiences, like seeing the world in a new way, ourselves in a new way. It's what's called in psychology as cognitive accommodation. It's the sense of like kind of like that mind blowingness of like, wow, like I'm seeing things in a whole new way, in a whole new light. I'm being freed up from past patternings, and now I can feel liberated and free to see things in a new way. And often that's a big part of what people experience when they have a moment of awe, is that sense of a big mental shift, like a big, like, wow, a kind of a waking up, so to speak, as you were talking about. Um, And what's really powerful about the emotion of awe is that the more we practice these experiences and have these microdoses of awe, so to speak, the more benefit we get from them. So it really is a cumulative effect. It's sort of like with medicine, we talk about there being a dose response where, if you're having chronic pain and you're taking hydrocodone or oxycodone or an Advil, you have to dose it a certain amount of times to get the ultimate benefit. The same thing we know with awe is that from our research studies is the more times throughout the day you dose, the more benefit you get. And we saw that in our objective data from our research studies. So there's no downside to dosing this, and we don't see any side effects. And it's free.
So what is the science behind awe? I mean, I would imagine it would be like you would need some creative ways of doing that because it is such an ephemeral experience. I mean, there's so many, I think, degrees of what could be considered awe. It's something that's very personal. Like what is awesome for one person could be very
Exactly.
different from someone else. So how do you even go about beginning to go about that?
Well, yeah, you definitely hit it on the nail. It's like our fingerprint. How I am wired and what I find awe-inspiring, someone else may not find awe-inspiring. But I will tell you this, and this is sort of one of the neat things I love about doing things in the group classes that I teach. I tell the students that awe is contagious. So part of what we do in the group is people will share about their recent moments of awe. And when people share their awe experiences, it inspires awe in those that are hearing about it. I mean, right? If I were to share with the listeners about this like really incredible moment of awe that I had recently, and I actually had one that's like really kind of very simple, but I had like a moment of awe. But again, I'm sort of an awe expert, but I was really in awe of zippers and like just that how these devices are so simple, but yet they completely change the way we experience like our clothing and our bags. And I mean, they're so brilliant. And I was just in awe of like the opening and closing of a zipper. And it's so ordinary, but yet it kind of really is, it is somewhat mind blowing, just like how simple technologies can just like completely change our world like that. So in terms of research studies, and understanding that, awe is unique, the early research studies were really had to um, sort of have generic moments of awe, I guess, so to speak, and they were extraordinary moments of awe. So they would use like fight simulators or give people the experience of what's called the overview effect, where they would put people in an immersive experience like they were an astronaut looking out at the Earth from a distance. Um, or, excuse me, they would, let's say, a lot of the research has been done on students at UC Berkeley. So they have a natural history museum there, and they take students to go see the giant skeletons of dinosaurs, or to do exams out in the redwood forest there rather than like in a classroom, and see that students do better on tests out in nature than they do that's awe-inspiring than they do in a very generic, boring classroom. And what I really like about our research that we're doing is we teach people how to experience these moments of awe in the ordinary. And so really, our research allows people to find their own awe. Like what's awe-inspiring to you? What do you find that moves you, that you find beauty, that you find wonder and amazement? And so our methodology really allows the individual to figure it out for themselves.
Is when you were speaking like about the thing with the zipper, for sure we can be in awe of that. I mean as you said, there's something in these ordinary things that we take for granted. Like we tend to reduce them by name, and then that kind of takes away the magic of it. It's just a zipper rather than like really being with it, really trying to to see the mechanics of how it's working, even being grateful that that's there rather than having buttons where, maybe wind can pass through or something like that. But what also comes to mind is this idea of curiosity. Is there a difference between curiosity and awe? Um, like one of the things I've been interested in is also people who live to be very old ages. And obviously, it can be very personal too, but I think one of the threads that you find, one of the commonalities in people who tend to live to be very old, is they tend to have a curiosity for life. Like even as they get older, there's still seen as there's still more to life to be discovered. Like there's still something that's calling them, that makes them get up in the morning. Like I have a grandmother, and she's in about a week's time she's going to be 98. And she has this beautiful practice where every morning she wakes up and she just looks around, and she says she finds just one thing that she can be grateful for, and she just focuses on that. She just takes a few seconds in a minute, and she just like sits in that gratitude of like, I'm thankful for that. Um, what do you think are like what is that difference between curiosity and awe? Because I would imagine there's a lot of similarity, but maybe there's some difference in that as well.
Yeah, I think that the curiosity is a part of the awe, really. That what this practice is doing is it's helping people um, see the world with childlike wonder and amazement. And so children are very curious of the world. They live with that childlike wonder. And um, this idea of selective perception, which is, we're living in our lives day to day, and we can choose to be in awe and wonder of all the ordinary things. You can walk your dog down to the park, and in that 5 or 10 minute walk, you can be stuck in your head and thinking about all the things you have to do that day, or worried about the past or the future, and depressed or whatever. Or you can open your eyes and your ears and make that an awe walk and see things and appreciate things that you've never witnessed before, even though you've maybe done the walk 1,000 times. I mean, every time I take my dog down to the park, like a 4 minute walk from my house, twice a day, I make that an awe walk, and I can see things every time I go that I've never seen before, because I'm curious and I'm open. I really love this quote by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who he was a contemporary of Martin Luther King. And if you've ever seen pictures of MLK, it's sort of this classic photo, black and white, like on the bridge of the Selma March. And there's this one white guy who's dressed like as a rabbi, like that's Joshua Heschel. And he was sort of known as the awe rabbi. That's one of the things he's known for. And he has a quote that says, "Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed." So, back to your question, yeah, curiosity is key. And I love that story about your grandmother. And we actually in our book shared a story, someone we had interviewed, a family friend of mine that lived the same way as like your grandmother, just so curious about the whole world around her every day. And that brought her so much joy, and probably her longevity as well.
Also, another thing that comes to mind is this aspect of, I guess you would call it fear, um, because often awe, I think that the counter side of that could be something like fear. I mean, when you speak about like the awe of God, there's often this also this other way of saying it, which is the fear of God. I mean, I'm thinking like of the Bhagavad Gita, if people have read that. It's the story of Arjuna, and he's in this dialogue with Krishna, who's kind of one of the avatars or the manifestations of God, of Brahman. And it's this very beautiful tale about he's preparing for battle and he's having this very kind of internal conflict of like, there's people I know over there. Do I have to kill them? What is my duty? What is good and bad and right and wrong? And Krishna is presenting himself to Arjuna in the form of a human. But eventually Arjuna gets kind of like cozy to him and familiar with that form. And he says, actually, I want you to show me your true self. And Krishna says, are you sure? And he says, yes. And he, in the book, it says he presents himself with his 10,000 folded face of his true form. And 10,000 is a very esoteric number for wholeness, for completion.
Hmm.
And he's so terrified, Arjuna, that he prostrates himself and he begs Krishna to transform back into his human form so that he can relate to him again. But it also reminded me, because you were saying they would do some of these experiments with university students at Berkeley and then the Natural History Museum. And I remember as a kid, I grew up around Washington, D.C., so we had all of these amazing museums that were free of charge, so you could just go into them anytime you wanted. And I remember walking the Natural History Museum was always my favorite. And I would often I really love the dinosaur sections, and for some reason I would always find myself at some point in like the underwater section of the dinosaurs, and just these massive, I mean, especially as a kid, I mean, even seeming more massive, just these monstrous, like just the size of them and kind of the ferocity of some of these ancient animals. And I would stand there in awe, like how is that even possible? Like, how am I even living in the same world of that? And I'm also trying to kind of like put myself back in that experience. But I think what I would imagine is there was also a sense of seeing that almost from a place of maybe no mind and being in awe. But then also the mind would activate, and I would probably have visualizations of like, what if I was in the water of that? And then this sense of fear would come, because I think something, as you said, that awe is also this vastness, this sense of almost us being so small in the face of something so great, but that can also generate a certain level of fear. Do you, and I would imagine this is part of your research, and I believe you spoke about this, but this idea of what is that relationship or that line between awe and fear?
Yeah, that's a really great question that people ask around sort of the Bible, talking about, the trembling in fear of God, and the shock and awe when we see, horrible things on the television or in the news. So that type of awe is actually, they call it threat-based awe. And then there's positive awe. So there were actually two different emotions. And the word awe is used for both of them. But I guess in some ways it's a bit of a mislabel. There is a different, I guess in some ways there's a bit of a spectrum, as you were alluding to, that you can go from being that positive in awe of like the beautiful dinosaurs, then shifting yourself into, oh my God, if I was like alive then and this T-Rex was chasing after me, I wouldn't have positive awe anymore. I'd be like experiencing threat-based awe and fleeing for my life. So from research studies that have been done, this is not my research, but other people's research, they put people in what's called functional MRI. So it's looking at the brain and can actually see the firing of activity in different areas of the brain that lights up. And so the threat-based awe starts off in an area of the brain. It's called the middle temporal gyrus, and then it connects to the amygdala. And for those of you that read a little bit about neuroscience, the amygdala is that fear center, that fear part of the brain. So it's a very different pathway of what's going on in terms of the firing of the nerves. Whereas a positive experience of awe, it does also starts in a little bit of a different part of the medial temporal gyrus, but then it goes to the anterior posterior cingulate cortex, and the supramarginal gyrus. And these are areas of the brain that connect us to compassion, of connection, of admiration, also a sense of reward, and just overall feeling good. So originating again, sort of similar parts of the brain, but then they sort of really go off in two different directions depending on what people are ultimately experiencing.
Do you know, has there been any science on potentially the positive benefits of the more the kind of fear-based aspect of the awe? Like also I was thinking when I was in the Amazon, there's a number of poisonous snakes. One is the bushmaster, the shushupe, they call it, and a number of times I saw it. But I remember one time specifically at night where I almost stepped on it, and but as I was looking at it, it was kind of one of these moments where things slowed down and like my mind, I would imagine, more or less stopped, and there was this moment where I felt this deep connection to it and really standing there in awe of its beauty, but at the same time, being completely terrified of the potentiality of what that could do to me. Um, I would, I don't know, but I would imagine there's also some benefit in that fear-based awe as well. Um, Potentially even like a stressor on the body. Like often, a certain level of stress on the body is beneficial. Too much stress becomes, again, dysbiosis rather than symbiosis. But is there any research on that more kind of fear-based awe versus the more positive sense of awe?
Yeah, I don't think there's been research in that area around the fear-based awe. Um, I mean, there's definitely a lot of research on the emotion of fear. Um, and I guess one could connect that to that, but um, fear-based awe in particular, not that I know of. The focus is really based upon, in terms of research out there, on the positive aspects of awe.
So what are some of the findings that you've found around that, or that other people the benefits of whether it's maybe more cathartic experiences of awe or these more kind of microdosing, as you said, experience of awe. Uh, I think the premise is that obviously that's a good thing to incorporate into our lives. But what does that actually look like on an individual? What is beginning to happen or change to their physiology or their psyche? Like what are the benefits of that practice of awe?
Yeah, so in terms of like the big picture and understanding what's happening in terms of psychology and our our emotional and physical health, I talked about how awe is a prosocial emotion. So researchers have studied um, understanding how like awe improves one's sense of connection, of generosity, of compassion and kindness, improves relationships, political open-mindedness, as we already talked about. There's a really great what's called a white paper that UC Berkeley Greater Good Science Center has out on awe. So I'd recommend if your listeners, if they're interested in kind of diving more into that nuances of that research, to look at that paper. Um, and then, as I already sort of shared a bit about my own research, we saw decreases of depression and anxiety. I mean, the depression decrease of 36% is just really quite mind-boggling in a program where we had people practice auth just 3 times a day over 21 days. And then saw some longitudinal data supporting that long term as well. So I will talk a little bit about like what's actually happening in the physiology, because I think that's sort of what you're really kind of curious about, and like what's going on. So um, a few things, like there's sort of 4 key things that are happening. We know that when people have experiences of awe, this is from a 2017 paper, that there is a release of oxytocin, which is I think pretty well known as being the sort of trust bonding hormone. So that is sort of pumped out when we have these positive experiences of awe. Also, in terms of what's going on in the autonomic nervous system, the vagus nerve, which is thought is really being sort of one of like the master control system of our of our unconscious nervous system and running the show, like, so to speak, in incredible ways. For those that like to read magazine articles, Scientific American just came out with a piece in last month's January. Article was all about the vagus nerve. Just brilliant, brilliant article, just involved how the vagus nerve is involved with chronic inflammation and a lot of chronic illness, as well as just general management of our heart, blood pressure, heart rate. They call it your vagal tone. And so it is, the vagus nerve is critical to optimally managing our stress and how we are interacting with the world, and managing all that data. And so when we are doing practices of self-care, we're increasing what's called our vagal tone and better able to deal with stress out there in the world. So the AW practice increases one's vagal tone. In particular, the AW method that we teach, there's a breath component involved with it, which we haven't done the method yet, but we have people take a really long, nice exhale in and a slow exhale out as sort of finishing the sort of short practice, this microdose. And the vagus nerve attaches to the bottom of the diaphragm. It has up in the brain and it goes down to all of our visceral organs, and there's a big anchor in the diaphragm. And so when we take that long, big breath of expanding our diaphragm, we are giving the vagus nerve like a healthy dose of like stimulation, saying like, hey, like, do your job and calm us down. And I think if the listeners just do this even right now, if we take a big breath in and a nice long exhale out, we can feel like a real soothing and a calming. Even my voice just sort of slowed down a bit and feels grounded and rooted. So we know the AW practice is increasing vagal tone and helping with the vagus nerve. Another area is what's called the default mode network. So with these brain scans, we know that the monkey part of the brain, where we're having all these random thoughts all throughout our day, our daydreaming, our inner chatter, it slows down. We put people in scanners, we look at their brains when they're having moments of awe, that chatter part of the brain slows down. So awe brings us into the present moment, and our mind quiets down, which is a good thing in terms of brain health. And then the last part is this inflammatory story, which I'll just share a little kind of glimpse about why I find that this is like particularly so awe-inspiring. So our immune system is made up of what are called cytokines. They're these protein molecules that are basically saying friend or foe. This technology that we have is 4 billion years old. When the first cellular organisms came onto life on this planet, they used these cytokines to basically say, you're my friend and you're my foe. And we have this 4 billion year old technology of like what's going on in our own immune system and our own physiology all the time. So we are part of that initial birth of life. Obviously we are, but just to say, like, that ancient technology, a friend versus foe, is what's working, is how our immune system is basically working. So the big bad kind of gangster of this is what's called interleukin 6, IL-6. For people that have remember with the COVID pandemic, and people were dying from not really much from COVID per se, but because their own bodies were attacking with cytokine storm, reacting to the COVID virus. So IL-6 is sort of that mastermind that's sort of running the show and beating everyone up. So this is in a Journal of Motion paper from 2018. Blood levels were taken of people that were experiencing different, what we think of positive emotions. And awe was the only positive emotion that actually lowers these inflammatory cytokines IL-6 in the bloodstream. So you dose moments of awe, and we see an immediate decrease of inflammation in our body. And if you think about this sort of microdosing practice and like the power it has, that if we're practicing this multiple times a day, we're giving ourselves like a significant change in our immune system and our inflammatory state, which has like incredible benefit for our overall health and well-being. One of the my co-collaborator is Javier Lopez at UC Davis. He's the head of cardiology research. We just finished, and it's being published right now, hopefully soon, a long COVID study, a nationwide long COVID study looking at teaching people the AH method. And then I'm not going to go over, I can't really report the data, but it's very convincing that this method is helping people with long COVID, which is a chronic inflammatory state. And we're now in discussion of doing a heart failure study. So heart attacks, heart failure is a chronic inflammatory state with IL-6 being off the charts. And so we're building this program of the AH method and teaching this to patients with heart disease so that to hopefully see some incredible like long-term benefits of helping their health. So that's those four aspects that we sort of touched upon are really the cornerstone of what's actually happening in our physiology when we practice the AH method.
Yeah, amazing. I heard you mention that in this kind of study of awe, they measure different countries or continents, and I think North America came out the lowest as having less than one awe-inspiring event per week. Um, I'm sure you have some different theories on that. Is that maybe something you can talk about? I mean, even as I was mentioning, I kind of grew up in the woods, and but even spending time in the Amazon. I mean, there I think just being in nature can allow people to experience those, just the sheer diversity of the fauna, even of the flora, of seeing the stars. Um, Also, I remember even as a kid, I would sometimes with my father go out on these bird watching expeditions, and as a kid, I noticed it seemed very strange because all of these people were looking at birds, but I noticed a lot of them, they didn't really seem to be looking. They were just naming, and they would kind of see a bird, and that's the name of the bird, but there was no joy there. There was no awe, because they weren't necessarily seeing that. They had reduced it down to a name, and it was then kind of a check mark that they checked off. But this idea of like really really seeing things, as you said, I think that idea of seeing things through a child's eye is a really beautiful way of saying it. um, and then also the other thing that came to mind, I would imagine a big part is also this kind of new, I would say even chronic addiction that we have to devices, where probably predominantly cell phones, but computers. And I was even thinking about, I mean, there's even this kind of downward, kind of contracting emotion as we're looking at these things, and all of our focus is going there. And I think so much of that idea of awe, as you said, it's something of vastness, like it's something of literally opening ourselves up, like opening the heart, like opening the vision. Even our posture changes as we look outward or upward to this vastness. Do you have a sense of why in North America um, that is the lowest, and potentially like things that we can work on to be able to increase our overall sense of awe?
Well, I think you really kind of hit it on the nail talking about our addiction to technology. Um, the From my understanding, Americans spend the most amount of time on screens than any other culture on the planet, and we're also quite an overworked population. Um, so um, in terms of, changing that trajectory for us, I mean, this awe practice, this awe method is really so simple and can be done at any time and any place to really help people reconnect themselves to that sense of vastness, and the healing aspects of awe. Um, one of the things that I've committed to with my wife is that we have a Sabbath day once a week. We just schedule that on our calendar and say this is a day where we're going to have no screen time, um, no shopping, or really spending the day reconnecting ourselves with ourselves and reconnecting us with each other and reconnecting ourselves with nature. And it's been really healing for us. I think that this practice really teaches us that we need to slow ourselves down and reconnect to what is most important, which is being in community, connecting with those that we love, being in nature, and nourishing our health. So one has to set intention and to really make this a practice that you choose to put into your life. For those that are listening and like, okay, well, I want to try having some experiences of awe in my daily life. One of the things I recommend to people is when I teach this program is what's called habit stacking. And what that is that you would bring to things that you already do on a normal basis in your day and bring awe into that habit that you do. So, for example, most people begin their mornings with a beverage, a coffee or a cup of tea. And so use that morning ritual as an opportunity to have a moment of awe. For me, I really enjoy coffee. And so there's opportunities to have awe with opening the bag, smelling the grounds, watching water boil in the early morning and seeing the steam rise from putting it in the French press and watching the granules when the hot water gets in there and the aromas that come out. And there's all these just incredible opportunities to really have a moment of awe and to really deeply enjoy and savor that experience. And, it's just kind of funny talking about the comment on the technology piece. So a lot of people are into these Keurig machines where you just basically throw a pod in and push a button and your coffee comes out. But not only is that bad for the environment and probably bad for you as a consumer because you're getting all these microplastics in your body and the coffee isn't even all that great, but you're like literally stripping away the experience of awe. You don't get to have that wholeness, that whole ritual of like making and savoring and enjoying that whole experience that could be potentially the most awe-inspiring moment of your day. So, I love this conversation and I really appreciate you asking the question about it. How about for you? Are there things that you do in your day that are awe-inspiring or opportunities for you to have a moment of awe?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the idea of coffee because I heard you mention that in another interview, and I shared that with my wife and some of my friends. They sometimes give me a hard time because I have a coffee ritual in the morning, and it's quite a long one, and they often think it's quite funny, but. I mean, for me, it's very much about that. It's a beautiful day for me or a beautiful way for me to start the day. I mean, I also usually take like an ice shower in the morning. I go to the bathroom, brush my teeth, and then I have an ice shower. And that also, there's something where it really puts me in a state of discomfort. And I actually find that a beautiful way of starting the day it very much wakes me up because it's quite shocking for the body. Although even talking about the inflammatory response, I think it's very beautiful in that way because I very much feel that it helps with that of kind of shocking the body through that cold therapy. But after that, I like to make a coffee. It's been a little different now because I have a newborn, so usually I'm with him in the morning. So my coffee routine has gotten a bit out of balance. But now it's kind of coming back as he's getting a little older. But for me, I really like espresso. I like Turkish coffee as well, but I have a very nice, it's called a Flare espresso machine. It's a hand pressed espresso machine. And it's a similar thing. I mean, often people would ask me, well, why don't you get at least like the automatic espresso machines? But for me, there's something really beautiful in all of those details, or why not buying already ground coffee? I mean, for me, there's something very beautiful in taking the canister out, even because I have like one of these air kind of vacuum canisters, and just hearing the air, smelling the coffee, grinding it, even adding like there's a part of alchemy that I really like. I'll often add cardamom or maybe different herbs to the coffee for different effects, and like grinding it. And for me, there's an entire art of like each of those steps along that way really makes or breaks the coffee. And so there's something alchemizing about it. And but also the entire process becomes a sort of meditation. I mean, I'm very present. I'm not doing anything else. And like for me, there's a real beauty also in especially with the espresso. There's a particular name for it, that the portafilter. It's like an open-ended one where you see the coffee coming out, and this kind of they call it like the tiger's eyes. It begins to form, and it's all these different amazing colors, and getting everything right so that it forms this crema. And like depending on the thickness of the foam, for me, that's like a sign of a really good espresso. And each of those details is is for me very beautiful, and it actually does. I mean, it may sound funny, but probably not to you, but there is something like very awe-inspiring about it, and like getting that perfect cup of coffee. And it's never perfect. Like there's always something that can be a little bit better, and that's part of, I think, the art of always that curiosity of always like being attuned to what I can do better. And so that's one of them. I mean, I also find a lot of inspiration in nature. It's something I wish I could even spend more time in. It's something where I find a lot of peace and a lot of curiosity. For me, nature is a huge teacher, and it's a huge part of my work. For a long time, also, as I said, I lived in the Peruvian Amazon, and I worked with large groups of people. And interestingly, working with people was always a big form of awe, was seeing people going through these very cathartic experiences, and being part of that, not just even in the physical, but more of the energetics of that, like really kind of going along with people's on their journeys. And I think that's one of the amazing things about this plant work is, as I was saying, it very much opens people to these experiences of awe where you just see such profound shifts in people where they realize like the universe, the world themselves is so much bigger, so much more vast than they maybe could have imagined, which also inspired the name of this podcast, like the universe within us. Like we all have access to that. And whatever the technique is, but getting us in touch with that, I think is something very beautiful. One of the interesting things about the book is like it's obviously about awe, maybe in a more lowercase sense, but then you also developed this technique of awe in maybe capitalized sense, like AWE, to really to use as a technique, a tool, to help people to get into that felt sense of awe. Can you speak about that, about kind of what that means, and how you came up with those? Because you were mentioning this idea of mindfulness and kind of boiling it down to something that could be very accessible. And so like why those three stages are so important, and what each of those stages is kind of tapping us into. Because I also think in a lot of times these techniques, like we just kind of take them for granted, but usually like each of those little pieces actually holds a key, like that's beginning to unlock something, and segueing on something that allows something to really, as they say, for the penny to really drop.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I just wanted to share that I loved your description of your coffee ritual, and I was having a moment of awe hearing just yeah, just hearing what you do with your espresso. It's really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that awe for me. And so Jake and I, my co-author, we came up with a very simple technique that this really blossomed out of that pancake experience I shared at the beginning of the podcast, where I had this sense of like an orgasm, we call it, when you have like an extraordinary awe from these sort of very simple, ordinary moments. So we take the word awe, AWE, and we break it into an acronym to sort of, and these are the steps to the practice. And basically, what we wanted to do was give people training wheels, because not everyone is naturally wired to look out into the world and be awe-inspired, or to hear things and be moved by them in a really awe-inspiring way. So it's a very simple technique. I'm going to just talk people through the technique, and then we can have a moment of awe together using the technique. So A stands for attention. And what we're asking people to do is to bring their full, undivided attention to something that they value, they appreciate, or find amazing. And we're only asking you to bring your attention to that for about 15 to 20 seconds. So even if you have a monkey mind or you're ADD, we all can really attune our minds to something, even just for the cycle of a breath. It's really that short. So you're fully into that moment, experiencing it. And then the W stands for wait. And the wait is a pause. And I think of it as the opportunity to savor, to like really enjoy that experience to which we're attending our attention towards. An analogy I like to share is like if I'm with you, Jason, and we're walking together and we're coming to a doorway, and I go ahead and I open the door and I'm pausing and I'm holding the door open for you. It feels like really good when someone caretakes and they're opening the door for you. And so what you're doing is you're opening the door for yourself. You're allowing yourself to just really have a momentary pause and just savoring and deeply enjoying that moment that you're attending to. And then the E stands for two things. One is a nice long exhalation out. And so you're taking that full breath in and a longer exhale out. And the E also stands for an expansion. And what you're allowing to happen is to let that moment really fill you up, to let it expand in you. And for me, I'm very visual, so I can actually imagine like a light expanding inside of me, and that experience of awe just like really getting almost bigger than my physical form and expanding out into the world. But when we have these moments of awe, if you can think back to like an extraordinary moment of awe you've had in the past, maybe like a beautiful view or an incredible sunset, or like witnessing your child be born. You maybe felt tingles or chills in your actual physical body. And that's because when you have a moment of awe, there's an excitement. There's an energy that is so excited that it wants to release through the body, that chi wants to move. And so you like literally can feel like a tingle or chill in your extremities. And so you're using your own physiology to create that experience of awe. And those are the three steps. It's really that simple. So once you kind of get the sense of the technique, you don't really have to think about it anymore. You can literally just kind of go through the steps and you like have a moment of awe. So we'll go ahead and do the practice together right now. And for those of you that are maybe at home, you can just like look around the space you're in, or wherever you are listening. You can look around the space that you're at right now. Maybe it's a piece of artwork. Maybe it's a piece of your furniture or family photo. And if you're really struggling with something, you can even just close your eyes and recall a memory of the past and something that was awe-inspiring or special, someone you loved or love, and connect to them with your eyes closed. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do the practice now. I'm going to focus on this green drink that I have and all this like beautiful chlorophyll that comes from living plants on the bottom there, and like have a moment of awe on that. So bringing our full, undivided attention to something that we value, appreciate, find amazing, and just fully be with it. Wait and pause, savoring. Another breath in, a big breath in, and a longer exhale out. Just letting that expand, fill you up. And just invite you, close your eyes just for a moment, notice how you feel. Notice if you feel any shift or change in your thoughts or your physiology in your body, any shift in your sensations. Just making note of that. And then opening your eyes and coming back. How was that for you, Jason? And what type of moment of awe did you just have?
One of the things that when you're mentioning that practice of being aware of things around us, I was gifted this beautiful book a number of years ago. Um, I think it's called The Beauty of Everyday Things. It was written by a Korean Zen practitioner. I forget his name. It's a fairly old book. But one thing that book really, I found it very beautiful because in a lot of, I think, spiritual practices, there's kind of this idea of renunciation, of renouncing things and not being attached to things, which obviously there's a huge benefit to that. But even kind of like in this idea of tantra, there's the right-handed path and the left-handed path, and this idea of there's also the ability to truly appreciate things, and this book was all about the beauty of everyday things, and it was kind of this folk tradition of crafts of, like common things like the spoon you would use for tea, or the cup you would use for something, and that we've really lost this art of the beauty of things, and really, like, when we're surrounded by beauty, that can be very awe-inspiring. When also when you make something or you have something that's very precious, and that's something that I found, not even necessarily by practice, but just as a part of my life, is also to have things around that are quite beautiful, that are quite meaningful. And often when I look at those, that's something that I do, is that there's a sense of kind of gratitude or awe that arises in seeing the beauty of that thing. And so as you were describing that practice, it made me recall that, about that idea of really valuing kind of the things we have, and to be aware of that, to really look around the room and to see, like, wow, there is beauty in that, and there's something in that emotional resonance of taking that time to really see, that creates this sense of peace, this sense of beauty, of awe.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's one things I love about this practice is really there's an infinite number of things that we can find awe-inspiring that I I surprise myself actually that um, I've never been bored of this practice, and I've never run out of things to find awe-inspiring. And one of the things that we've learned from our research, and just having taught this to so many students over the last few years of since the book's been out, that you can't force a moment of awe to happen. Even though we have this sort of constructed practice to help people with training wheels to learn how to experience awe in the ordinary, you can't force it. You don't go to the edge of the Grand Canyon and you say, well, I want to have that really profound, extraordinary moment of awe right now. Like, it's got to happen right now. Like, it just doesn't work that way. The awe arises when we learn to let go, when we learn to be present and really at ease with the way things are. And then it just sort of bubbles up. It just arises. organically, in the right time. And I open myself basically like a field of just like awareness and be like, okay, well, what's going to rise for me as a moment of awe right now? And it's just really quite profound and a beautiful practice to sort of go through the world and experience things in that way. Um, so when people tell me, oh, I'm trying to do this and it's really hard and it's not working, I'm like, well, you need to let go. First of all, and just sort of let things arise. And when you let go is when they'll bubble up. And I'm sure you see something similar with your students. I imagine when you like leading your retreats and people may come with certain intentions and a certain level of force and pressure and strive and try. And that often is a hindrance for like the deeper work to come up. And this the simple practice turned into basically a 300-page book, um, because there's so much depth actually to it. It's like this onion that I just keep learning more and more, as I've reread the book and just kind of go deeper in the practice. Is that this idea of living with presence and ease, um, versus coming at life with force and strive and pressure and command and control. It's probably one of the biggest lessons I've gotten out of the whole this whole spiritual practice. Do you find the same thing around that kind of dichotomy of living with ease and flow and presence and versus force and strive and grasping, and how that plays out in the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. There's a lot of I think, in this work about this idea of intention, and I think intention is very important. Intention is also an idea of creation. It's taking something that's unmanifest and it's trying to call it or name it to bring it into this world. And so there's something very beautiful, very valuable about it. But also with intention, I think it's like many things double-sided, because then we can get very focused, very fixed on a certain outcome. And it's also this kind of difference between intention and expectation. And I think all of these practices respond very well to intention, but very often, if not always, the way these things manifest is very different from how we think they will manifest. And I think that's part of the healing modality of it, is that ultimately these healing practices are trying to bypass the rational mind, that the mind that tries to control or to label or to reduce something. And I think that's maybe what you're talking about, that kind of hindrance. When we try and grasp or control it, we can get in our own way. And as we begin to soften or allow that kind of expectation to go, that's when something can really drop in, and the beauty or the awe can really begin to take effect. One of the interesting things, I think, also, even in that practice you just had us do, and I wonder if that's something you've also thought about, is because we spoke about some of these other kind of qualities or emotions like curiosity or fear. And I think one that also for me really correlates to awe is this idea of gratitude. And I think often when we are in a space of awe, of real presence, of awareness, there's also a deep gratitude, a deep sense of appreciation for what is, not what we want it to be or how we think it should be. There's just a deep reverence, a deep place of gratitude for what is. It also, when I was younger, I think I read some books. I believe it was a medical doctor. Maybe you're familiar with him. I think his name is Larry Dossey, and a big part of his work was this idea of prayer. And kind of, even as we were talking about earlier, this idea of maybe even believing in something, like even believing in a medical treatment, how that will affect the outcome. But it's been a long time since I've read his work. But the thing that I really remember from that is that from all of his years of research, he came to the conclusion that yes, prayer is real, prayer does work, but that the highest that the highest form of prayer is a prayer of gratitude, of giving thanks. And I wonder if that idea was, if that was something you found, or how you maybe also see that idea of gratitude as being part of that bigger sense of what it means to be in a space of awe.
Well, there definitely is an aspect of this awe practice that gives one, that brings in a sense of gratitude and appreciation. Um, we we talk about this in our book, just in terms of like a bigger model of where awe fits in terms of the development of our consciousness, um, and living life with more, ease and flow and grace. Um, this actually is really the core work of my co-author Jake, the psychotherapist, who has this idea of a theory of what he calls the three levels of consciousness. And awe arises and lives within sort of this highest state of consciousness, what we call spacious consciousness. Spacious consciousness is, the place where you're doing a lot of that deep healing work when you lead your retreats with people, when they're accessing a, a, a place of timelessness, of expansiveness, of deep peace. Um, we get there with prayer and deep states of meditation and spiritual practice. The second, kind of one little lower down, you almost can think of like a chakra chart here, where spacious consciousness is up here, up in the head, above the head, and then the heart consciousness is that state of gratitude and appreciation. Um, and that in of itself is like an extremely powerful and valuable healing practice, is just making one aware of what they're grateful for and appreciative in their life. And so people have asked me that question many times, like, well, is gratitude awe? And I would say that um, what we are grateful for and appreciative of, yes, can be a source of awe, but the experience of awe is really a nonverbal state. It's one of like non-labeling in a way. It's like just really being with and experiencing, where appreciation practices are usually one of more of like an identification and labeling, or like kind of what I'm grateful for, and making a gratitude journal and a list. Um, so I like to kind of make that distinction for people.
One of the things that also came to mind as we were talking about these practices of also becoming aware. Um, when I was younger, I was traveling around the world, and I met this Israeli guy, and we were sitting around a fire one day, and he was saying in the Jewish tradition that there's a saying that there's three things that a man can kind of look at indefinitely. One is fire, one is water, and the third is another man working. So I always thought it was a Jewish thing, but then recently I was talking to someone, and they said in the Arab world they have the same saying, but I thought that was interesting, because part of that is that connection to nature, like obviously the fire, the water element of that, but also that idea of another man working. And when we were talking about like the art or the ritual of making coffee, like often seeing that, like seeing someone doing something with their hands, like that, I think also can produce that state of awe. Because I think often when we're talking about awe, it's often something very, like something that seems more in the realm of nature, something that's very vast, very expansive. Uh, but also, I think people can experience that. Like if they're sitting in a fire, like often we can be at awe. There's a deep presence, or water, whether it's a lake or the ocean. I think a very similar thing. But I think it's also interesting, like in the realm of humans, that idea of seeing another man or another woman working. I think there's something also in that idea of like seeing someone doing something, maybe like at the highest form of art, I don't know. I was thinking of like if you're seeing some show, like you really like dance or opera or something, and seeing something at the highest level, or I think even movies can often produce that, where we're really seeing something where the stakes are very high or the art form is very high. Is that something you also find as a commonality of things with people, where like in the realm of humans, uh, the realm of creation, of work, of doing something can also produce that sense of awe?
Yeah, definitely. We usually start with awe of senses because that's sort of an easiest way for people to start to begin to practice and develop their awe. Um, but in our book, we talk about there being different categories of awe or kingdoms, regions of awe, and one of them is what you're talking about, is like awe that comes with in appreciating like the arts and science and like the concepts of like the what makes the world work that can just be kind of mind-blowingly inspiring. Those are all wonderful experiences of awe. And then we can have what my co-researcher Decker Keltner talks about is a sort of sense of moral beauty, like the awe that comes from the kindness that people do towards other people, or the things that like visionaries have created, like John Muir or like Thomas Edison or Marie Curie, like just like brilliant minds and scientists that have shaped the world, or just simple acts of kindness that can be inspiring, or seeing things that your infant son is you find awe-inspiring as he begins to grow himself and develop. We talk about awe coming from interconnectedness. So my relationship with my dog can be one that's really awe-inspiring, and with my spouse, with my daughter, people at work, my patients can all be sources of awe. So as I said, the experiences of awe are really um, it's just infinite. It's not just of the senses, but it's of really the whole workings of the world around us can be um, really awe-inspiring and sources of inspiration for us to live in that sense of appreciation and wonder of the vastness of everything.
Well, Michael, amazing. We're actually over 2 hours now, so it usually tends to go by pretty quick. This has been amazing. I know when we started, you said there was something in the epilogue of your book that you thought would be really good for the closing of this. Is that something you'd like to share? And also, is there anything else that you'd like to touch on that we didn't touch on yet in this?
Well, I really appreciate, the opportunity to be here and connecting with you with these moments of deep conversation, and really we've had moments of awe together and inspired each other, and hopefully I've inspired some of the listeners with awe. And um, I would just encourage your community to give this a try. And we have a lot of free resources on our website. It's thepowerofawe.com, and they're welcome to download like meditations that we have there, and guided practices, and a workbook. And um, I put out a weekly moment of awe, a little newsletter, just kind of sharing like simple practices and things that you can find awe-inspiring, um, and to inspire you with your awe practice as well. And then we have a little area on our website where people can post their moments of awe and share that with other people. So um, we're just as I'll share here in the epilogue, really working towards hopefully this awe practice is just one piece of all that we're all working on to try to make this world a safer, more loving, kind, peaceful place for all of humanity and the other inhabitants of this planet as well, such as our sacred trees and other wild beings in the world. Um, so
Amazing.
I'll,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead. Were you wanted to say something, and then I can share the
No, no,
epilogue?
that's great. Yeah, please share.
Yeah. So, in our conversation that we've had together, Jason, we've talked a lot about sort of the individual benefits of awe, and our epilogue sure talks more about the more global and community benefits. So the awe method is more than a self-help technique, and the implications of awe go well beyond personal transformation. Awe touches everything, and perhaps most telling is the effect it has on others. We're wired to attune to others' behaviors and moods. Our nervous system senses the emotions of those around us. Just as being the recipient of a warm smile can lighten our mood, when we're in awe, those around us feel it too. Awe is contagious, and so practicing the awe method is one not so small way we can contribute to the world. In this book, we covered how the awe method is grounded in science and that a whole body of science supports that awe changes lives. So we have a big symbol crash ending to the power behind the simple practice of the awe method. If practiced frequently enough by enough people, a critical mass as it were, everyone would experience a significant heightened shift in consciousness. Awe changes us. When we share our awe, we change the world. How can we be in awe of someone and physically or emotionally harm them? How can we be in awe of the natural world and destroy it? How can we be in awe of life itself and not live as if every day were a miracle? In awe, the tone of every conversation, from personal to political, shifts from having an agenda to being open and curious. Our conversations impact how we raise our kids, how we help our aging parents, how we treat our spouse, how we participate in community, how we mentor or supervise people, how we govern a city, and how we lead a nation. We can think of no downside to practicing the awe method because awe is the light, the appreciation of nature in different cultures, the curious and open mind, the generous and giving soul. During times of darkness, we need awe more than ever. So awe awaits you and surrounds you in the ordinary moments of your life, like the view of the stars that fill the night sky. Awe is free and always available. All you need to do is pay attention to what you value, appreciate, and find amazing. Wait, and then exhale and expand into the unlimited timelessness of awe.
Well, beautiful, Michael. I think that's a perfect way to bring this to a closure. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. This was a really beautiful conversation for me. I think the work you're doing is really profound, and I think bridging the kind of more metaphysical and spiritual with the science and the research you're doing, and I think it's amazing work. You mentioned the website, thepowerofawe.com. Is that the best way if people want to learn more about the technique, to buy the book? If anyone has questions and they want to reach out, is that the best way to do that?
Yeah, the best way is to just visit our website. If you want to email me directly, my email is michael@thepowerofawe.com. And occasionally, about once or twice a year, we'll do live classes online. And my wife, Alana, who's a yoga teacher, body worker, professional surfer, she and I co-lead a retreat together. Next one is in January of 2026 in Mexico. So we have a week of deep awe immersion. So we'd welcome anyone who would like to join us. And again, I just love hearing from people that have experienced the practice or have any feedback. Or it's like, I know you can appreciate this also as a teacher, just how much we inspire ourselves, awe-inspire ourselves from our students and people that are moved by our work. So it's always a joy to hear from people. Thank
Well,
you
amazing.
again.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this, Michael.
Thank you, Jason. It was really just a true joy, and appreciate the work you're doing out there in the world, and so inspired by your depth in the practice and your podcast. So I wish you all well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, everyone. That's it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Michael. It was fascinating for me to sit down and talk to him. As I said in the beginning, I think he's doing amazing work. I think it's a really, really vital, very, very important aspect of this work. And not just this work, but being a human being, the human experience. I think awe is potentially even the experience that really connects us in a much, much deeper way to the essence of this life, to our place in the universe. As we mentioned, this idea of remembering on a deeper level who we are and where we come from. So I think it's fascinating work he's doing. As I mentioned in the intro, if you're interested in working with myself and my colleague Marav Artsy in this plant medicine work, we have an upcoming retreat in Portugal, April 21st, and in Ireland, July 1st. If you'd like more information about that, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org. There'll be a link in the show notes. And if you're interested in supporting this podcast, that's always a really big help to me. Patreon is a beautiful way to give back based on this idea of reciprocity. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's also different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers also give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. As always, to all the patrons, to all the people supporting that way, thank you very much for your help. It always means a lot. If you're not able to do that, as always, helping with the algorithms is a really big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. I think I filmed a number of these in advance. I think this is the last of a few that I'm releasing. I think after this I have my friend Roman coming on. I interviewed him once before. He recently released a book, Roman Hannes. I forget which episode number that is, but I think it was quite a popular episode. He's really well respected in this field. I always really enjoy speaking with him. And after that, I'm not exactly sure. I have a number of guests lined up, but we haven't shot yet. So until we do, I won't give any names, just to make sure that the shooting is actually complete. So I think that's it. I hope this finds you all well. As always, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for the support, and I will see you all on the next episode.